Last time I did the top 10 movies that I hate but everyone else seems to love, so now it's time to reveal what fits the opposite description. These are the movies that I like but everyone else seems to hate. Now, something I want to clarify before we start is that I don't think any of these movies are masterpieces. I do genuinely love the number one pick, but I don't have a why can't you see the genius in them kind of attitude to any of these movies. They are all flawed, but I still have fun watching them. So with that said, these are the top 10 movies that I like, but everyone else seems to hate. Number 10, Asterix and the Big Fight. Several of the Asterix comics have been adapted into animated films, and judging from its IMDb score, this seems to be one of the least popular. But I'd say it's far better than the couple of others that I've seen at any rate. I loved it as a child, so maybe this is just nostalgia talking, but I still quite enjoy it. The film tries to combine two of the comics into one, its namesake and Asterix and the Soothsayer, which I guess fans of the comics didn't appreciate. But I still think the story it forms out of the two of them works really well. Number 9, Mission to Mars. In my early teens, this was actually my favourite movie, but looking back at it today, I find the acting and parts of the script to be pretty insufferable. That said, however, I still think this movie has a ton going for it. The story, despite an admittedly unimaginative ending, is a pretty solid adventure for the most part. I especially love how flawlessly the movie conveys a sense of complete isolation. It really succeeds in making Mars seem barren but beautiful. And the score by Ennio Morricone, in my opinion, is vastly underrated. So it's definitely a flawed movie, but I still enjoy it. Number 8, Judge Dredd. I haven't read any of the comics, but I understand this movie completely missed the point, just turning the scenario into a typical action blockbuster. But even for the general public, it didn't seem to go down too well, and I'm not entirely sure why. Some people, including myself, view this one as very self-aware. It knows it's a dumb action flick, and it has a ton of fun with it. It makes fun of every over-the-top action cliche under the sun, and I can't help but laugh along with it. Still, I won't deny that the 2012 Dredd movie is far, far superior. Number 7, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3: Dream Warriors. I know I'm not alone in thinking this is easily the best of the Nightmare on Elm Street sequels, but most people I've talked to don't think much of it. It's certainly not scary, but I didn't really expect it to be. It's still a fun movie, though. It definitely plays up Freddy's witty personality more than the first two, and of course after this the series started to lean very heavily on comedy, but it still has a good story that respects the original. If they'd ended the series here, this really would have been a solid cap to the trilogy. Number 6, Jumanji. I don't know if most people necessarily hate this movie, but I haven't heard many praise it, and it seems to have become overshadowed by its recent follow-ups. I've heard complaints that it's pretty light on story, but the whole point is that if you finish the game, all the horror will stop, so it makes sense that most of the movie is just playing the game, and occasionally being interrupted. Most of the set pieces are pretty awesome, especially the approach of the stampede. The CGI is pretty obvious, but not too distracting. Even the characters are likable enough, so I always enjoy it. Number 5, The Man with the Golden Gun. I've never been a huge Bond fan, to be honest, but this has always been one of my favourites, top 5 easily. No one else seems to agree though. It's usually described as too silly, too reliant on comedy. I would have never thought such a thing. To me, it always seemed more straightforward and less over the top than many other Bond movies, especially as a follow-up to the ridiculous Live and Let Die. That also extends to Roger Moore's performance. He's much more deadpan serious than he was in Live and Let Die. Plus, you can't go wrong with Christopher Lee as the villain. Number 4, Terminator Genisys. I'm not sure why everyone disapproves of it so much. Because it just rehashes the first movie? Well, yeah, it's an alternate version of events. The marketing spoilt too much? I guess I got lucky there. The trailer I saw just teased me with the revised Sarah Connor. The plot makes no sense? I disagree. I could follow it just fine, though it was never explained where Sarah's Terminator came from. It's not as good as the first two movies? True, but who would have expected it to be? Still, I do think it's close enough to a return to form for the franchise. Number 3, the remake of The Hills Have Eyes. Maybe it's just because I saw this remake before the original, but I've always much preferred this later version. Being stranded in the desert with a murderous tribe after you is a pretty effective horror situation, and I think this version captures it better. I especially like how it makes the desert environment look truly arid and harsh. Because of that, it's perhaps the only horror movie where the daylight is actually scarier than the darkness. Plus, the makeup effects on the mutants are brilliant, and you're so engrossed in the story that you never notice the uncensored gore, it just works. Number 2, The Hole. Again, my appreciation for this one may simply be due to lack of experience. This was one of the first psychological thrillers I ever saw. It's about a group of friends who decide to spend a few days in a hidden bunker, but their friend who has the key never returns to let them out. So being stranded in a bunker underground with no hope of anyone rescuing you is a pretty scary idea, and the movie really conveys that effectively. I also like how it's told in flashback by the one survivor, so it plays out like a mystery story. It's all good stuff. And the number 1 movie that I like but everyone else seems to hate is Snake Eyes. This is one of the most complicated mystery thrillers I've ever seen, which I guess lost a lot of people. I'll admit I was pretty confused the first time I saw it, but it was the good kind of confused that made me want to see it again to try and understand it better. And once it clicked, I was always intrigued by it. That's really all there is to say about it, because I don't want to have to get into spoilers. But as well as the story, I also really love the performances from the 2 leads. I'm a huge Gary Sinise fan, but Nicolas Cage really is the star here. Most people seem to think the movie's either too confusing or the second half just gets too ridiculous, but I've always loved the whole thing, enough for it to take the number 1 spot on this list. Runners up. Omen 3, The Final Conflict, has a solid enough premise to keep my interest, and Sam Neill is a ton of fun to watch. Thor: The Dark World is my favourite of the Thor movies because of how steadily it increases your interest and excitement. It's like a perfect incline. And Tron brilliantly makes the inside of a computer a living world, and I love how it puts your brain into overdrive. You have to think in order to follow it. So that's the pair of lists, the movies that I hate but everyone else seems to love, and vice versa. Are there any cases where you're in either of those situations? If so, I'd love to hear what they are. Tell me some movies that you hate but everyone else seems to love, or the opposite. And explain why. I think that's the most important thing. And that's the main thing I'm trying to get across with both these lists. There's no definitive right and wrong, it's all personal opinions. So if you like something that everyone else hates, go ahead and continue to like it. And the same if you hate something that everyone else loves. And if you can explain why, invite people in on your frame of mind, then you might get people to look at some movies in a different light. There are infinite ways to interpret a movie, and discussing different viewpoints is the key to understanding, so that, as Doug Walker put it, this isn't like a war over what's good and what's crap. At least that's what he said back when I still respected him, but judging from his more recent behaviour, I have to wonder if he ever actually meant it. I still think they're words to live by, I just wish the source I heard them from wasn't so questionable. So thanks for watching, see you next time.